You're listening to the Primal Happiness Show, a podcast dedicated to helping you thrive in this crazy modern world. Every Tuesday, we explore the nature of how our minds really work, what exactly the human animal requires to thrive, and how we can live happier and more fulfilling lives. If you're new here and haven't yet taken our free class, then there's no better place to get a jump start on reclaiming your primal happiness. It's where we'll guide you step by step through our antidote to today's modern world. Simply head on over to primalhappiness.co/antidote to get the free class and discover how to thrive without having to move to a planet that's not so crazy as ours. But now, your host, Lian Brook-Tyler.
Hello, my beautiful people. A huge warm welcome back to the show. In today's crazy modern world, men and women are living shallow, disconnected, and unfulfilling lives. So we created the path for those who are ready to reclaim their wildness and actualize their deepest gifts. Our upcoming offering along this path is a crucible of wild awakening for women, in which we'll unravel the mysteries, freedom, and gifts of your body, which is one of the most powerful portals to the soul. When I first had the idea for unraveling the body, I had a sense then of its purpose, but it's becoming even clearer by the day. Women being able to inhabit their fullness, the wildness of the soft animal of their bodies, is exactly the medicine the world needs right now. I believe that from there, everything we need becomes possible. So if you're a woman who is hearing that call back into your body and ultimately into your soul, please come join us. We begin next week on the 13th of May, and you can check out all the juicy details now at primalhappiness.co/unravel. Enrollment closes on the 12th of May. So if you're feeling this is for you, don't miss out. Go and get your place now. And now for this week's show. It's our monthly show called All the Everything. And it's where I jam on an eclectic mix of topics. This is where you can get up close and personal with me, get inside my head and hear what I'm up to and thinking about. In this episode, I've shared what I've been up to in the past month, what I've been consuming and creating, and then dive deep into the topic, making time for soul when time is limited. So what a gorgeous topic, huh? And very timely. And as ever, it was chosen by the members of our Primal Happiness Facebook group. So thank you so much for that. I really do appreciate every vote that you make. And just to say, I'd had a bit of a chaotic morning before jumping in to create this episode, and I completely forgot to record it in the usual way for the first 16 minutes. Those minutes, thankfully, were captured by the Facebook Live version, so not lost altogether, but the sound quality of that first section isn't up to our usual quality. Please do stick with it. It does return to our usual standards from around 16 minutes in. And I promise you it is worth it if you're interested in living a soulful life, which, if you're listening to this show, I'm guessing you are. Let's jump in. Welcome to May's All the Everything. Welcome, welcome. And I am going to start, as ever, by sharing what I've been up to in the last month, so what I've been up to in April. And for the last, I don't know how long, quite a long time, year or so, I've been doing it through the lens of what I've been creating and what I've been consuming. And that's quite interesting. I just realised how that applies to something I'm going to share later on. But I like to keep, that's a lens I guess I have on life generally, that in order for us to have this kind of nourishing cycle of creativity, and what by creativity I don't mean literally painting, but a creative way of living, we need to receive, we need to take in, and then we need to create and give out. So I try and look at my life like that anyway, so it just then makes it really easy when I come to do this show. I usually have a sense of what I've been doing anyway. So in terms of which order should I do it in, I think I'm going to start with what I've been consuming this month. And I've been consuming lots, but I usually just pick one thing. And the thing that has really, I guess, spoken to me most deeply this month in terms of things I consumed is a book called Untamed by Glennon Doyle. And I've noticed people mentioning this and raving about it, and obviously the title being Untamed has a very clear link with our work, Wake and Wild, Wildness, all of that kind of stuff. So it got to the point where I was like, okay, I'm going to give that a go. And so there's a couple of, I kind of want to talk almost to like two aspects I've seen on it, which you could be sort of seen as almost like pros and cons, but they're not quite like that. But if we look at that first, like what I've loved about it, what I think is really helpful and inspiring and activating about the book. Firstly, she's a wonderful writer. She really writes from the heart, very just unfiltered, and you really get a sense of who she is. And so it's just a pleasurable book to read from that perspective. She's also pointing to this way of being in the world, which again is so dear to our heart here at Primal Happiness and the work we do with Wake and Wild, where it's living from what I would call soul. She doesn't tend to use that word, but I think a lot of what she's talking about is absolutely, you could use the word soul, where she might use words like knowing, or kind of just having a sense of like what's for you. So much of what she's talking about is just this really beautiful kind of example and sort of simultaneously permission to others to live that way, which I see over and over again. When we're willing to live a certain way, and particularly a way that's not typical in our culture, that automatically, without even us intending it to be, automatically creates this deep permission for others to do the same. Whether we give that languaging through kind of an activation that happens in them, or just an idea or a sense of, wow, if that's possible for her, maybe it's possible for me. So I think the book acts beautifully in those ways. And she gives some really lovely, what would you call them? Maybe practices. I'd say practices, like ways that we can listen and understand better what's for us. So that's all the things I love about the book. What I'm going to share now isn't what I dislike about the book or the cons or anything. It's just more that what I've seen is missing. And it's interesting because it's not entirely missing. So it took me a while to actually realize it was missing, because it's kind of there, but not as clearly distilled as I have seen is really helpful for people on this journey. And the reason for that, I believe, is just that these are things that Glennon hasn't yet seen in this way or hasn't distilled. So it's not at all that I think she's kind of there keeping hold of the jewels and thinking, I'm not going to share this. I just think it's just at the moment her life experiences haven't allowed her to see the real need for including the body on this path of kind of deeply understanding ourselves and connecting to the soul, a deep connection to whatever word you want to give to it, wildness, nature. And then I think there is this power actually in, and again, it doesn't have to be the word soul, but really speaking clearly to that part of us, that deeper, wiser part of us, which I find that often the word soul itself has power. People can kind of like have a sense of like, oh yeah, there is this part of me that's absolutely, just like a drop in the ocean, is part of all that is, and has its own kind of unique, distinct qualities, its own kind of reason for being. And I think the more we're able to point directly to there, the more people can kind of feel that part of them is for them. It is there, is something they can reach, have a conversation with and live from. So they are the aspects that I can see would have been lovely had she, again, this is a kind of dream world, she'd had all of that sense of it herself and then put it in the book. So it's not a criticism of her at all. I think it's an amazing book and was actually quite helpful for me, because I read the book and thought, initially, I was partway through the book and I thought, I don't need to write a book now. Like, that's taken care of. And it was only a combination of me seeing the bits that were missing and then actually clients writing to me saying, amazing book, but she's not talking about the body at all. And apparently she's got quite a
a difficult relationship with her own body still, that made me realize, like, oh yeah, this whole body of work is needed, regardless whether that's, it's not just me that I would say is talking about these things like this. I often quote other women who I think are, I sort of bow down to how amazing they are. I'm going to quote one of my favorite authors, Marion Woodman, quite a lot in this episode. Clarissa Pinkola Estes is another woman who I speak of a lot. So I'm not saying like I've got the this is the only place you're going to get this. Clearly, we all bring our own unique qualities, insight, experience to whatever we're doing. But ultimately, what I've seen, the people who are able to guide others on this path to the soul almost always include those aspects of the body and that connection to our wildness and the languaging, one way or another, of the soul. So anyway, do go read it though. Please don't let me put you off. There is so much treasure in there, regardless of those bits not being as present as I would have liked. Okay, so what have I been creating? The thing that really stands out to me is a webinar I did on Wednesday, so Wednesday this week, with Sarah Sanderson in her gorgeous group, When Women Speak. And I think we're going to get that loaded up onto YouTube today. So I'll include a link to that because I would really recommend go watching that. It was, for me, quite a departure from the level of depth I've been willing to go to in a kind of more public setting, let's say. So if I'm in a kind of more intentional container, like Wake More Feminine, or for example, working with one-to-one clients, there is, for me, a sense of I know what I'm bringing, they've already been a yes to. By choosing into that work, they're a yes to whatever I'm then going to offer them. Clearly, they can then decide for themselves these little aspects or parts of the work that aren't for them. But overall, I feel no sense of needing to hold back on whatever I can give them. That's not felt safe for me to do outside of those kind of like more intentional containers. Although clearly I talk about these things all the time on things like the podcast, there is a kind of real line in the sand I've drawn where I really don't talk at any depth at all about certain topics. And, the women, if you speak to the women in Wake More Feminine, they will say like, wow, yes, the things we get into in Wake More Feminine, like I pretty much rarely even kind of gesture to publicly. So that's what I mean by there is a kind of whole level of depth of this work and my willingness to be seen that I've just kind of kept out of that public gaze. The webinar I did for When Women Speak was definitely the most unveiled I've been. Clearly within an hour's container, with a kind of that setting, there's only sort of like a tiny level of depth and certainly a tiny level of breadth that I can go to, but it still was the deepest and the most, I guess, directly I've spoken to this work of the descent into the feminine, into the body, into the earth, into the soul. And so it was a really gorgeous experience for me to be able to do that and have that kind of embodied sense of, oh, this is safe. This is okay. People do want this. People do like this kind of thing. And had some gorgeous feedback back. Had several women decide straight away that my upcoming course is for them, like signed up literally, like I think one of them actually did it whilst we were still on the webinar, and then a couple have since. So and I'm still having women contact me like now, a couple of days later, saying, I listened to it and I think this could be for me. So it was a real lesson to me, like when we are willing to show up and be seen, it works like magic. And I don't mean works like magic from a kind of business money sense, although that too, but from a much deeper sense of like really recognizing like who the gift that we are, what we came here to do, who we came here to be, can only really have that value when we're willing to be that, give that, allow it to be seen. So real lesson for me and a gorgeous, gorgeous experience. And again, it's really, I'd say, primarily for women, I think. There's no reason when men can't watch it, but I would say it really is going to probably speak more deeply to women because it was for a women's group and a lot of what I talked to was about women. Okay, let's get into the main topic. And this was one, again, that was chosen by the members of our Primal Happiness Facebook group. So every month I put in a number of topics, and also they can suggest some too, and they vote which one they would like me to talk to. And I was secretly really pleased when this particular topic was chosen because it's, for all the reasons I've just said, it's probably my favourite topic ever, and it's the thing that I've been most present to as one of the challenges of this time. And so the topic is making time for soul when time is limited. And so I firstly just thought, I love the fact that this group of people get that this is important. Like, they care about these things. So that's thrilled me in and of itself. Like, yes, they get that this is something that's like really valuable and important and is a challenge for them. So that thrilled me in and of itself. And I'm guessing if you're here listening, whether that's you're watching me do the making of live or whether you're listening to on the podcast, I'm guessing the same is true for you. So I love you. You are my people. And the other reason I was so pleased is because, like, yeah, what a gorgeous topic to talk on. So I am very happy to speak about this. So let's first of all start with, I've already kind of like gestured in this direction, but let's just first of all distill what I mean when I'm saying soul. And I, again, don't really think the word we're using for this matters that much. If you've got a different word that you prefer to use, just kind of like mentally substitute it every time I say soul. It's not like I'm saying this is the right word or the only word or it's exactly as I say it. I'm going to talk about it how I experience the soul. And so some people may call it like that unique essence. And again, I likened it to, yes, we're part of an ocean, and yet there's this kind of unique quality, this drop in the ocean that we have a sense of. Could describe it as your higher self. And a way that Marion Woodman, that I mentioned just now, talks about it, which is, I love this because I think this is where it really brings in the importance of the body. She describes it in various ways of like embodied consciousness or embodied spirit. And so the idea that, yes, it does contain this like aspect of our higher self, let's say, but it's only when it's in a body, only when it's embodied, that it actually becomes a soul. It requires the body to be what it is, if that makes any sense. So I love that. I think that's, to me, the most powerful way to hold this, that we're not just seeing it as this kind of up there, out there, intangible sense of self. Is actually something that, and again, more and more, the more we do this work, the more embodied it is. And so I think that's a really helpful way to hold this. And again, any of what I've said is an invitation. I'm not saying to you, like, this is definitely been evidence and it's 100% the right way to see it. It's how I see it, and how I've seen is the most kind of helpful, expansive way to look at this. So next, why don't we talk much of this thing called the soul? And I mean, the word soul is clearly used in our culture, but typically not in the way that I've just been talking about. And if we do, we will gesture to it, but it's not really something that people spend a great deal of time thinking about, talking about to their friends, unless you're friends with me, in which case you might do. And it's used in like kind of ways like, I don't know, talk about soul food, for example. And ironically, probably a lot of the time when it is used, I would say that it's probably not being used in ways that are truly nourishing or kind of honouring the soul. So it's a word that kind of does get used, but when it is used, it's not often used in a way that would really be providing much. And the reason for this is, firstly, this path of us living from soul is a lost path in our culture. I talk about this much more in that webinar that I've just spoken about, but it really isn't a
path that most of us are aware of, invited into, have guides for. So it's no wonder it is really very much a lost path. And when I talk about the lost path of the feminine, again, what I mean by that, and I haven't got time to really distill right now what I mean by kind of masculine, feminine energies, but if for the moment we just hold this is a feminine path, which is available to everyone. You don't have to be a woman for sure. And it is that descent into the body, into the earth, into our souls. And so it's a descent versus the ascension to spirit. It's descension rather than ascension. And it's not, again, I always say this, is not at all that I'm dismissing the very real benefit of having that ascension where we have that deep connection to all that is, to spirit, but it doesn't replace the absolute, precious meaning and depth that comes from that descent into the soul too. So that's part of it. We, for all sorts of reasons, just in our culture, don't have any sense that this path is available. So that's part of it. The second thing is, which is, I think one of the things that blinds us even more to there might even, to even have a sense that there's a path missing, you would need to kind of feel into there's part of me that wants to expand. There's part of me that wants to grow. And I think we get that sense and then get distracted by either that path to ascension. And again, when I say distraction, that has real benefits. So I don't mean to demean that path at all by saying distracted, but we certainly think, oh, that must be the answer. Or we think the answer is in kind of self-help techniques and learning to get better. It very much seems that it's easier to work at being better than to be who we are. It's when we're coming from that place of here I am, how do I improve on myself? How do I perfect myself? Ironically, that for most of us that feels like an easier thing than understanding who I am and then being more of that. So I think that's the other reason we get that sense that something's missing, something's lacking. And then we get pulled into one of those two ways of trying to handle it. And so we just never recognize there was this third path, this lost path that is available to us. And yet, yes, it's been kind of pavemented over to a very large extent. Okay, let me just take a sip of my coffee and focus where to go next. So I suppose it might be helpful to look at why this path is even, why does this even have utility? Why is this even something that we might want to walk? And I think the simplest way I could put this is it gives our life meaning. There's a quote here from our friend Marion that I've mentioned a couple of times now. If we fail to nourish our souls, they wither. And without soul, life ceases to have meaning. And that's what I see over and over again. In almost all of the conversations I have with people that are kind of any level of depth, say, for example, women who wake up feminine or one-to-one clients, a large part of what would have brought them to me is this sense of it feels like life is lacking meaning. That's not completely, black and white. I have no meaning in my life, but there is this sense of surely there's something more. Surely this isn't all it is, just trying to constantly, keep to the pace of the world, to manage, to kind of get through the day, to get my children to their adults. Clearly those things are important. And yet they're not really what are going to give us that deep sense of meaning, oh yeah, I'm walking the path I came here to walk. So that is really simply put, that's the reason. To live a soulful life means to live a life of meaning. Now we get onto the challenge here. how do we do that? And then there's the kind of like the second part of this, which is how do we do it, particularly in this time where for many of us, we're busier than ever and have even less time alone than ever. Clearly, that's not true for everyone. And so if you're someone who's actually got more time and maybe more time alone, this is actually perfect too. So whether you're someone that's like me, I'm really, have much less time alone at the moment than I ever normally would, this is going to be for you. But again, if you actually have tons of time at the moment, and if you're one of those ones who like the day is kind of feeling endless, this is perfect. This really gives you the opportunity, if you choose, to descend into what I'm going to describe here even more deeply. So first and foremost, let's just acknowledge the challenge here is that our culture has not been built in a way that is aware that this path exists, honors this path. And even if we start to get a sense of it, it certainly doesn't value it compared to all the other things that we value in our culture. So we don't value it in the way that we value that kind of sticking in those linear lines of our culture where we kind of need to get to a certain point of our career and our money and our house and all of those things, status. And so any time that we're wanting to, let's just call it soul work, that's kind of quite a big category of things, let's call it do the work of the soul, we're going to be running counterculture. We're going to need to recognize no one's likely to make this easy for us, quite the opposite. There's often a real level of guilt and shame that we're going to feel internally and may well come externally when we start to choose to live a more soulful life and all that entails. So let's first and foremost recognize that that's not going to go away by us pretending that's not a thing. And that's why I see having a very clear intention that that's how we want to live is really the only way this is going to happen. So for the moment, I would just invite you into, if this is everything I've said so far is speaking to you, just set an intention to live a more soulful life. When I would work with women more deeply, say, for example, in Wake the One Feminine, that's actually an invitation. I make an invitation for them to actually make a commitment to live a soul-led life, which is a big commitment to make. And quite honestly, I was just pondering this morning, thinking, I don't introduce that until quite close to the end of the entire piece of work. And I was just thinking earlier, by then, they've got a much greater sense of the magnitude of who they really are, much greater sense of their power and their choices. And it's funny because by the time I then ask them whether they're wanting to make that commitment, I think that's even more scary than if I ask them right at the start. So I don't know what that, whether maybe I should ask them right at the start, I don't know. But making that commitment is a big commitment to make. And I wouldn't sort of say rush into making that. For the moment, just set the intention in itself is going to have power. And I think is probably the only way you're going to make this happen. Without some sense of that being an intention that's important to you, you're not going to prioritize this. Let's be honest, it's just not going to happen. So that's the first part. Set an intention, or again, even better, make a commitment if you feel ready to do that. The next thing I want to say is everything I'm about to say is something that is simultaneously a kind of nourishing of the soul and a listening to the soul. And this will make more sense as I describe some of the things, some of the practices, some of the ways of being. And initially, it's probably more going to seem like a nourishing. And then you're going to start to notice you are more available to listen and listen to that next breadcrumb, listen to that next message, listen to that next sign of what's for you. But we need to be willing to do the work of nourishing first. And then after a while, the practices of nourishing become pretty indiscernible from the practices of listening. We'll notice that any of the practices I'm going to suggest hold both. And that happens fairly quickly, but we need to be willing to go first. We need to be willing to do the nourishing of our soul. And and recognize that this is going to be like anything that we do, first of all, likely to need some practice, almost like a building of the muscle before we're then able to kind of take back from it. So that's how I often see it works. But ultimately, we get to the point where we realize like, oh yeah, I can't even separate what's happening here. It's all happening simultaneously, the nourishing and the listening. Okay, so these, I'm going to just kind of now talk through a number of ways we can do this. And all of them, you know, I probably have done a whole show on some of these in of themselves, but I'm going to list out a number of things that I see are really deeply helpful. And then you listen to yourself again. Once you've made that intention, start that nourishing process. And then the more you do that, you'll start to hear yourself where you're being drawn next, which can look like all sorts of things. So I'll talk a little bit more about that, kind of like knowing where you're being drawn next in a moment. First of all, I just talk through some of the practices I've seen that can be so helpful. So the first one, and I've definitely done shows all about this in the past, is connecting more with nature, connecting more with the wild world, to the cycles of nature, to the way that nature flows in its own sure path, and finding ways of doing that again in an intentional way. So one of the things I spoke about before is finding a tree that becomes your tree, and make that kind of, if not daily, I make an almost daily pilgrimage to my tree that's up a hill nearby to me, a really beautiful old oak tree. But find your tree and go there, first of all, again, without really this agenda of kind of getting something back, just kind of get the tree. I'm putting get in quote marks, like as in like, see if you can understand the tree, like be as the tree, connect the tree. None of these words are quite doing justice to what I mean, but hopefully you'll get a sense of this. Like, allow yourself to be with the tree. And the more we're willing to empower that relationship, that deep, deep relationship, the more we'll start to feel that sense of nourishment and then start to be able to listen. Again, I could probably do a whole show in itself of how rewarding that relationship has been for me, and the sometimes like unbelievable, life-changing even wisdom I've received from that connection. It's not unusual that I'll be kind of collapsed against the tree, just tears streaming down my face because of the level of depth and timeliness, actually, that I've the messages or it's really hard to even put words to some of this because the messages feels like it's kind of like not quite what I'm talking about. But any of you that have had that kind of connection with another living being, not human living being, will have a sense of what I mean. But again, for you, that might seem really out there. Start small. Ultimately, just empowering that connection with nature on its own will start to serve you. The next one is creativity, and creativity for its own sake, not needing to, like children do, like creating, like my daughter in particular, she's 9 years old and she's just this kind of creative whirlwind. I see all children are, and then there's some that are kind of like, on a whole nother scale with it. She's one of those. And so in any day, she would have written poems, drawn pictures, written songs, like just constantly. And it's not with this sense of she needs to be at a certain level or she needs to be the best, whatever, singer, drawer, anything ever. She's doing it for its own sake. And that's the place. It's not, if you have something you are, really gifted at, clearly go do more of that, but also give yourself that permission to almost just like play creatively. There's just something so beautiful about us giving ourselves that permission to just be creative beings without the needing, again, without that masculine lens. I'm not in any way making the masculine wrong, just to say, I want to make that really clear. The masculine and feminine both have absolutely beautiful, good reasons for being. So when I say masculine, I'm not saying this dismissively, but when we bring this masculine lens to everything we do, like it has to have a reason it has to be done for a reason of kind of like producing something, we kill that kind of just the purity of being creative beings. There's a quote here I think I made. Yeah, this is actually the other part of the quote I've just read. So I'll read the whole quote in its entirety now. If we fail to nourish our souls, they wither. And without soul, life ceases to have meaning. The creative process shrivels in the absence of a continual dialogue with the soul. And creativity is what makes life worth living. So I think that quite nicely captures that creativity itself is a kind of like, as she holds it, like the reason for living. And it's certainly, as I see it, if it isn't the reason, it's certainly one of them. And in itself, it is a nourishing act. So again, it's one of those ones where it's like, it will give you everything as you give to it. The next one is nourishing your senses in all those beautiful ways. Pleasure is a particular value, you could even say. But it's funny because it's almost been, it's not entirely dismissed in our culture, but it's quite commodified. And part of the invitation I make in the work that I do with women is to be able to reconnect with that deep sensual way of living, but also to value pleasure again, but not pleasure through the lens of it having to be this kind of looking out there for whatever it might be that could, through the lens of not this deep nourishment, we might think that's in the latest handbag, for example, but this deeper sense of what really brings us pleasure, what really brings us joy, and how we can resensitize ourselves to really take as much from that experience as possible through touch, through taste, and an exploration, really, again, an invitation into allowing ourselves to explore without it needing to be this another way to produce, another way to be effective. Like again, all of this is just a totally different path. It's not about how we can do X to get Y. Even though clearly there is this other kind of like, the why that we want is more soul, but you can hopefully hear what everything I'm saying is a very different way of entering into that way of being. The next one is listening to your dreams. And the word dreams, just to say, can be dreams as in like what we desire, our vision for our life, and also the dreams we have at night. And I would actually say both are true here. I'm going to talk specifically to night dreams in a moment, but actually really listen to all of your dreams, those things that you feel a call towards, the desire towards, like those two. And with our night dreams, I think that there's been this, because we've had this, what would you describe it? Almost like meme-ish sort of surface level, like, oh, what do dreams mean? And then dream books, and oh, I had a dream about, I don't know, teeth falling out. Therefore, I don't know, I can't even think what that's meant to mean. Like I'm not confident or something like that. And I think that's a real shame, because what we've lost is that really gorgeous, deep connection, relationship, even what we can have with our dream self, that subconscious self, who is, I see as kind of like much a part of us as this kind of daytime self that we constantly prioritize and see as the be all and end all. So what I notice again with Wake the One Feminine is quite soon in, women start to have these like big, profound dreams, which firstly, they often will say like, I don't really remember having dreams like this until now. And they're also able to remember them. And there'll also be these kind of just without even needing to kind of inquire too deeply, there's something obvious. There's some message or symbol or sign in that dream. And sometimes it isn't as obvious as that, and it gives us an opportunity to start to deepen. Again, not rush out on Google, what's the meaning of this dream, but like get a relationship, like what does this mean for me? And often dreams, like our subconscious does, talks in symbols. So sometimes it's willing to kind of just go down another level of depth and think like, what could this mean for me? But again, the more we empower that relationship, just like I was describing a relationship with a tree, the more that will give us. The more that we're actually recognizing there's real power in our dreams, in our dream self, the more it will power us. It's got to the point now where for quite some time, I've taken a lot of notice of my dreams, and now they are ridiculously prophetic and just a real deep sense of guidance. An example of this is just a very recent example. About a week ago, I had a dream that one of my friends' husbands rang me and said, would it be possible for me to pay for my wife, I've been trying to be careful, I'm not naming names here, for my wife to join Unraveling the Body. And I woke up and I just had such a gorgeous sense of like, wow, like the fact that he sees her and her, loves her that much and wants this for her, can see that this is, a deepening that is for her. Like, it just thrilled me. So I wrote a Facebook post about it. Again, didn't mention names. And then thought there was clearly just this kind of really deeper message and metaphor about that, men and the masculine and the power of them seeing women and the feminine, which I loved. And so I was kind of sharing and thinking of it from that perspective. And then there's part of me is like, I wonder if there's actually going to be a kind of more tangible expression of this too. Like, I wonder if she will end up joining Unraveling the Body. And then yesterday she messaged me and asked about it. And then it was, I said to her, I don't know if you saw my post, but it was actually you that the dream was about. So I've been kind of almost like, I've been waiting for you. So that thrilled me. But then she's just messaged me this morning saying she is going to join and mentioned that her husband had offered to pay. So I just like, wow, it's literally such a beautiful example of what I just see over and over again now. The more we are willing to have a relationship with our dreams in that way, that kind of playful and yet honoring way, like they just hold so much for us. I just realized I've just spent so long talking about dreams, but it's just one of my favorite things to kind of invite people into having a different relationship with. Probably need to get on now. I realize I've been on here for quite some time. The next one is reading things that have that language of the soul, whether that be poetry, myths, old stories. That for me has been such a powerful part of my own journey. And I think, again, the more that we allow that to be just like part of the fabric of our lives, the more we'll be recognizing like this is just a way of living. Like, this isn't something I have to compartmentalize into these tiny pockets of time where I'm going to, I don't know, once a day do this one soul practice, but just becomes a way of being. So we've got, books of poetry. One of my favorite poets, Mary Oliver, just, probably got one in every room of the house. It's just like a normal part of life that, why wouldn't you have? And I think there's some poets that are particularly skilled, gifted at writing in the language of the soul. Mary Oliver absolutely being one of them. I often read her poems on all sorts of things, circles, webinars. David White being another. And of course, Maya Angelou. And I think, again, having, I love poetry, you may not, but I suspect there'll be something that is the same for you. But also I would maybe suggest, if you don't think you're someone who's interested in poetry, maybe just give that a go. I've noticed, again, through the work that I do with people, the ones that probably initially had the kind of most separated relationship to these things, like poetry to myths, end up absolutely falling in love with them. And so sometimes it's just, again, we've not grown up, like my children have grown up with poetry being a part of their life. Most of us didn't have that. I was quite fortunate that my upbringing was absolutely filled to overflowing with soulful things, like music constantly either playing or being played. Played on actual instruments, singing, writing songs, painting, like all of the things we've just been talking about. Like I was very, very fortunate that my childhood was just like, couldn't probably have contained more of that. That I know that's not true for most people, sadly. So this is an invitation for you to kind of just create a lifestyle, a house, a way of parenting where that is something that is just seen as normal. It's not seen as this kind of like unnecessary, out there, pointless thing. Quite the opposite. It's seen as a thing of meaning. So, and again, myths are a really wonderful way of starting to get a sense of those archetypal patterns that have been present for us, you know, the entire time really that our species has been a thing on this planet. And again, I don't really have time to really go in deep into this, but it doesn't seem to take too much for people to start to see there's something for them in myths. There is some just incredible mystery available to us that as we start to open ourselves up to this way of being in the world, this way of hearing, we start to hear things that are for us. And there's some gorgeous things that have, I think Stephen Fry has got, is it called Mythos? I can't remember. My husband's been listening to the audiobook in the car with his children. I think it's called Mythos. And so there's some really like accessible ways of hearing myths, or, you know, like the book, I probably mention almost everything I do. For women who run with the wolves. For men, things like Iron John and More Than True. There's lots of books that are kind of retelling of old fairy tales and myths. And then again, books like Women Who Run with the Wolves are beautiful because she then sort of distills some of the meaning and invitations in that too. So really, really powerful way of, again, this kind of soul nourishing, but then we'll start to hear what's for us too. Right, 2 more. And even this isn't a complete list. I know there's been a lot here, but this isn't a complete list. These are kind of the ones I see are most helpful, but especially when we're just starting on this journey. The next one is empowering imagination and visualization. Again, another Marion Woodman quote that speaks this beautifully. Kill the imagination and you kill the soul. Kill the soul and you're left with a listless, apathetic creature who can become hopeless or brutal or both. Wow. So, and again, because of how we've been trained in this culture to value the intellect over imagination, most people don't have an empowered relationship to their imagination. So that's something, first and foremost, I would just, you know, that doesn't have to look like anything in particular, but first and foremost, like just welcome your imagination back in, you know, allow all the different ways. And again, use your imagination to think of the ways that can happen, but really like imbue that with the just life-giving, creativity fueling, meaning providing power that it is. I cannot emphasize that strongly enough. The point where I shifted in my relationship to imagination and all that comes with it, including kind of visualization, I think that was one of the most transformative parts of my own journey. And I'd always had, for reasons that are going to be too long to go into now, I'd always had a bit of a fractured relationship with that. I've had... let's just say I've got a bit of a wacky psyche. And so if there's odd things that your mind can conjure up in terms of like hallucinations and visions, and I get the kind of form of like oral, yes, like optical migraine. It's called something like scintillating scaboma or something like that. I've completely mispronounced that. I get all of that kind of stuff and had a very fearful relationship with my imagination as a result. And so there was something very profound for me personally in welcoming that in and seeing it for the, again, like pure good power that it is. And I think the same is true for all of us. I just had a particularly fractured relationship for that reason. Lastly, and this could have come first, but I've left it last intentionally, embodiment. And so embodiment is that path of allowing ourselves to like be welcomed back into our body, into those places that we've been restricted from or had pain there through trauma. And so at the kind of like very first levels, that's just even just having that intention to be in our body, to feel it, feel what we can feel sensually, to allow ourselves to have the fullness of our emotions, to be in our breath. And then that can go deeper and deeper and deeper, where again, in Waking Our Feminine, there'll be practices that allow us to start to like allow our bodies to show the wisdom they have, to move as they want to move. There's some gorgeous quotes. Again, Marion Woodman particularly is, a large part of her work is about the body. One of the quotes rather here, this is your body, your greatest gift, pregnant with a wisdom you do not hear, grief you thought was forgotten, and joy you have never known. And I've just got tingles reading that. That is, I just don't think can be overstated. That relationship to the body that we have in this culture, where again, it's a kind of like treated as a machine, a thing that only has use if it either looks good or is kind of producing in some way. That is, I think, one of the deepest shifts we can make to recognizing our body is that, going back to the first description I was giving, it is our ability to like fully embody our soul that is really the work we're talking about here. And so again, there's so many practices and ways that we can do that. And I'll talk in a moment about unraveling the body, which is at the moment it's just for women, but like that will be packed full, overflowing with that invitation to come back into our bodies. For men, again, that's something that Jonathan offers in Waking Our Feminine, Waking Our Masculine, which isn't going to be available, I think, into the autumn. But anything where you can start to choose back into your body, into resensitizing it, into recognizing the power of the breath. Work like Wim Hof's is another really amazing way. Work like the people who are really focused on embodiment. I had a chap called Mark Walsh on the podcast a few months back. Go listen to that episode. There's many, many ways. It could be, for example, and obviously particularly when this period has ended, taking classes like aesthetic dance, where you start to allow your body to feel how it wants to move. So many ways. And they all have just, really, really gorgeous, gorgeous reasons to do them. So if you're hearing that is for you, just see what you're being drawn to. There's no wrong way of doing this whatsoever. Which then brings me to the final thing I wanted to say here. Just being willing to step on this path and prioritize it, make an intention around it and start to do these practices itself is really powerful. The next part, again, is that listening, that will start to become this cycle where it's hard to even discern whether we're actually nourishing or listening is happening simultaneously. But the thing is, we'll then start to know what's next for us, what's going to take us deeper. And so that becomes that, willingness to listen and then take aligned action. And that could look like all sorts of things. Again, I can give examples with my own work. I know that the women that have come to work with me in any of my different programs, offerings, that has always been this kind of like that soul calling, that breadcrumb that felt to them like this is the next step to deepen. They may not give that like languaging, but I know that's true because the way that we talk about our work is the language of the soul. We intentionally don't use languaging that is going to only appeal to people who are kind of looking for those kind of, very heady based, like, how do I get from A to B? We intentionally don't talk about these things that way because we want to talk to the people who this is the right next thing for them. And I say right, meaning it's right for them. Their soul's calling them into this work. It might be that your soul's calling you to a certain book or to make contact with a certain person. But the real key thing here is to trust that next breadcrumb will be revealed to you and will be perfect for you. And of course, you then have the invitation whether you're going to walk in that direction, walk in the direction of that breadcrumb. And the next part of this I want to say is that's always true. I notice sometimes people can get to a point with this work where the early breadcrumbs aren't going to require too much of a leap of faith or too much of an investment of ourselves, whether that be financially, energetically, or anything else. And the deeper we go, the more those breadcrumbs might require from us. They're still the same. They're still the same kind of like, this is what's next for us. But we need to recognize that could be, for example, going from doing a group program to then investing with a guide one-to-one. A guide could be, mentor, coach, anything. But the further we go on this journey, the further we descend into our soul, into the underworld, the more we're likely to need guides of that kind. And again, they come in many, many forms, not again, always so readily available in this culture. But again, trust that the breadcrumb will be shown to you and it will be available to you. If you're getting that nudge to go work with a certain person, or again, go on that course or take that trip or read the book, it will be because that one's the right one for you. And trust that will always keep happening. That's certainly what I found. There has never been a point where I'm feeling this sense of, I feel called to go deeper, but I have no idea. And sometimes that call to go deeper may be languaged differently. It might be, I recognize that I've got this real fear or this wound or this shadow. What the hell do I do about it? What the hell I'll do about it will be shown to me. And the next one will then be shown to me. That's what I just see over and over. And it's certainly not just true for me. I see that over and over again with all of the people I work with. I think that's all. Let me just see if I've got a killer quote here that I can leave you with, because I'd gathered a whole bunch of them thinking, oh, yes, this will do us. This will do us. Another Marion Woodman quote. I just felt like, because I love the way she talks about this, I've just gone deep on Marion Woodman today's show. A life truly lived constantly burns away at the veils of illusion, burns away what it is no longer. Sorry, I've messed that up. I'm going to start again. A life truly lived constantly burns away veils of illusions, burns away what is no longer relevant, gradually reveals our essence until at last we are strong enough to stand in our naked truth. Oh my God, I love that so much. So that's the end of today's show. Again, first thing is, if you took anything from this, just take the invitation to make an intentional commitment to live a more soulful life. However that wording is for you, if it's if you're going to go all the way to a commitment to live a soul-led life, wonderful. I won't stop you. But even just to take that kind of first step of having that intention will be really powerful, and everything else will come from there. Okay, what else have I got to tell you? I guess first and foremost, like if you're a woman and this is speaking to you, and again, you'll know if it's a kind of calling from your soul, Unraveling the Body starts on May the 13th. And it is going to be something very special. I don't yet know exactly myself what that's going to contain and look like. All I know is with each Waking the Wild Feminine, we are going so deep now that so many of the kind of early teachings and practices that I was offering in Waking the Wild Feminine are now actually perfect for unraveling the body. So there's a level of depth that's going to be there unraveling the body that, quite honestly, even when I first conceived of the idea, I had no idea that that's how deep that was going to go. So it's going to be 6 live sessions, a Facebook group, and really that invitation to explore that relationship with our body, which can seem like, oh, it's just about the body, meaning, I don't know, the relationship we've got to our body image. Yes, it includes that, but it's much more what I was just talking about in terms of that using it as a doorway to more soul, using it as a way of opening ourselves up to live more congruently, more truthfully, more alive. So that's really kind of that's the overall vision I have for that crucible. It's not going to have the same sense of, real kind of raw intimacy that we have in Wake the Wild Feminine. You don't need to sit it, like it doesn't contain a circle. And I've done that intentionally because I know for many women, that feels like a kind of breadcrumb too far. So it's live sessions and you can obviously join live, ask me questions, receive coaching, but it doesn't have the circle format where you're required to sit and speak your truth. So for women who are terrified of that, that isn't contained in Unraveling the Body. What else? It's also the lowest investment financially of probably anything I've ever done, but certainly for years. It's £100. And again, that's been intentional because I really wanted to make it as accessible for as many women as possible. It's also, I don't know quite yet how many women are going to be joining us. I would say I'm getting the sense it's going to be kind of somewhere in the 20s. Not all will be available. Not all will be able to make each live session because I've chosen to make it at 2 different times so that women around the world can join. I know there's been many women who are in, say, New Zealand and Australia that have wanted to join Wake the Wild Feminine, couldn't because of the time. So I've intentionally done it at 2 time zones. So some will probably be able to join some and some the other, and that's fine. It's not required that you join all sessions live at all. Even if you could only listen to the replays, that would still be really valuable. I guess the link for that, primalhappiness.co/unravel. Go check it out. Got any questions? Let me know. But again, the key thing is it's not about me convincing you this is the best thing ever. It's only going to be the best thing ever if you're feeling the call to it. If you have, it's going to be the best thing ever. If you haven't, it won't be. What else? Go join our Facebook group if you're not already a member. Like I say, I ask every month what you like me to talk about. So if you've got something you want me to talk about, go join that, go post there. And it's also just I'll post things there now and again. Members post things, and it's people who really want this wilder, more soulful way of living. So, there's not many groups of people who want to live that way. So if you're feeling that's you, come join us. And that's primalhappiness.co/ no, it's not. I always do this. Facebook.com/group/primalhappiness. If you are watching this on Facebook and you don't already listen to our podcast, go check that out. It's a weekly show. Usually it's me interviewing people. And then once a month, I do this kind of show. And that's at primalhappiness.co/podcast. What else? I don't know. I'm clearly not prepared for this whatsoever. I don't know. If there's anything else you want to find out about ways to work with us, particularly if you're a man, obviously I've mentioned Unraveling the Body. That's just for women. We offer all sorts of things that are for men too. And that's at primalhappiness.co/go deeper. There's Wake the Wild Masculine coming up in probably autumn. We haven't decided yet. We may be running something in the next few months, which I'm gonna speak this out. I think it's the first time I said this publicly. I think the next thing we might do that's a group program that Jonathan and I both run will be Waking the Wild Heart, which will be all about intimacy, relationships, polarity, and that will be for men and women. And then our one-to-one work is Waking the Wild Sovereign, which I won't go into depth in the moment. Go check it out if you're feeling called to that. We are pretty much full in capacity at the moment, but reach out. I think for men in particular, there may be a possibility of a space or 2. We're pretty much full to the brim at the moment with women. But go check it out. We'll always, if it feels like someone is being called to this work and it's the right time for them, we'll see how we can make that work. So reach out and let us know. I think that's everything. But thank you so much for watching or listening or watching the replay. So good to have you. Have a wonderful weekend. A gorgeous rest of your Friday. Lots of love. Mwah. Bye-bye. So that's all the everything done for this month. Are you going to set the intention or even make the commitment to a soul-led life? If so, do let me know how you're getting on with the practices I invited you into. And the best place to do that is the Primal Happiness Facebook group. Go there and post what's coming up for you or any questions you have. And the link for that is facebook.com/group/primal happiness. I'd also love to have your feedback, questions, and topic suggestions for future shows. And the group is the perfect place to post those too. If you'd like to join me live for the making of the next show, I would love to have you there. Just go like our Facebook page, facebook.com/primal happiness, and you can watch out for the show airing live on the first Friday of every month at 10 a.m. BST. I'll be honest, I'm usually around 10 minutes late. So if you get there and I'm not there, just hang on. I will be there. If you'd like to get notes and links for everything we spoke about this week, do hop on over to show notes at primalhappiness.co/episode 280. And that includes the link to the webinar I mentioned about embodying the feminine. And women, if you're feeling that cool down into your body to inhabit its full wisdom, power, juiciness, and radiance, then, as I said earlier, Unraveling the Body is starting next week. And enrollment is closing on the 12th of May. So please don't miss out if you're feeling that call. Go and get your place now at primalhappiness.co/unravel. If you don't want to miss out on next week's episode, head on over to Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, or your Android or iOS app of choice and hit subscribe. That way you'll get each episode straight to your device as if by magic as soon as it comes out. Thank you so much for listening. You've been wonderful. Catch you again next Tuesday.